All right, so let's get started. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Cary Salkin, and I'm the sales executive for Populytics. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of the Lehigh Valley Health Network. We provide solutions that support employee well-being, including benefit corporate wellness, preferred EAP, health benefits administration and consulting, as well as enhanced care coordination through our payer collaborations. Today, we are presenting an employer's guide for integrating supportive mental health habits in the workplace. We will hear from Carolyn Lamparella, a licensed counselor and the program director for Preferred EAP. Carolyn will talk about identifying deficiencies in your corporate culture when it comes to openly recognizing mental and emotional health problems and give you tools to address those issues. We'll also walk through some simple mindfulness techniques that you can practice anywhere and anytime. Also presenting is Brigid, our health and wellness coach and health educator for Benefit Corporate Wellness. Brigid will educate you about how overall wellness in the workplace can positively affect mental health, and will promote wellness through a custom personalized wellness program. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and I will bring them up after the presentation. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Carolyn. Carolyn?
Thank you so much, Cary. And it's so great to be here this morning talking about a subject that is so incredibly important right now. Obviously, the last 2+ years have really highlighted our need to address mental health on a broad scale. And, you know, when we came together and we started brainstorming about this webinar, you know, Brigid and I kept coming back to, you know, what is our goal? Our goal here is mental health for everyone, right? So often when we hear the term mental health, we think about individuals who might be in crisis, who might have some type of diagnosable condition. But really what we want for our employees is for everyone to feel as though when they come to work, their mental health is respected. So we wanted to begin with a definition of mental health, just so that we are all working from the same framework. What is it that we really mean when we say someone has good mental health? Well, those individuals are able to recognize their potential, right? They can live up to their potential. They have the ability to cope with normal stresses. They can work productively, and they contribute to his or her community. And ultimately, isn't this what we want for all of our employees, for all of us? We want to be able to completely live up to our potential, to maximize our strengths. Let's differentiate that from mental illness. You can move to the next slide. What do we actually mean when we talk about mental illness? I mean, these are conditions that we often hear about: anxiety and depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, things of that nature. And when we talk about an individual who is struggling with mental illness, it could be something that is chronic. Many individuals do have chronic mental health conditions that require ongoing treatment, but it can also be occasional, right? Just because someone is diagnosed with a mental illness, it's not necessarily a life sentence. And what we have found, certainly during COVID, is that individuals who never sought mental health treatment before were now reaching out for support. And, the upside of COVID for us, at least at Preferred EAP, is we now have access to virtual therapy, and people have become so comfortable with virtual therapy that we are now able to reach so many more individuals. And so that has always been a goal of ours at Preferred EAP, is to increase access, to increase utilization of an EAP benefit. And we are finding more and more that that is becoming a reality. And again, the upside of COVID, that comfort level with just reaching out. But we wanted to differentiate, those individuals who, are struggling from mental illness. We certainly are talking about those individuals and want to make sure that we are supporting them and providing them with the best possible resources. But again, we are really trying to address the mental health of everyone. You can move to the next slide. So let's take a look at some statistics. What are we actually talking about when it comes to mental illness? As you can see from this slide, it's generally accepted that about 1 in 5 individuals will experience a mental health condition in their lifetime. About 1 in 8 people who present to the ED are also experiencing a mental health condition. And again, one of the things that we are seeing happening is, in the past, if someone who was struggling with mental illness presented to the ED, it was really unlikely that they would get the support that they need. They might get some treatment for their acute symptoms, but often they didn't, EDs didn't have the resources or the knowledge or the expertise to refer those individuals for treatment. And as a result, you see we have a fairly high percentage of adults who have unmet treatment needs. And that's 2017, 2018. I am sure that has changed in the last couple years. It's certainly a challenge for all of us, making sure that folks who are struggling are getting the right support. It's particularly problematic for individuals who are dealing with substance abuse. And at Preferred EAP, we treat many employees who are struggling with substances. And I mean, that's one of the things we do. That's one of the benefits of having an EAP program is you have that linkage with treatment facilities and the ability to refer, to get them placed in the proper setting and then following them until they complete their treatment. This is certainly one of the reasons it's important for companies to have an EAP program. But some other general statistics when we are just talking about general mental health. We're finding that, back, and again, I'm sure these numbers have changed. This is from 2017. 61% of employees feel stressed and burned out on the job. What are the reasons for lost productivity and lost work? Persistent fatigue, insomnia, aches and pains, excessive anxiety, weight gain. We can add to that we do know that one of the #1 reasons that employees will go out on FMLA is due to depression, right? And it's something that we don't typically talk about, and maybe these individuals are going out on FMLA for other physical ailments, but often we see that depression is the driving factor. You can move to the next slide. And so I'm going to turn it to Brigid right now, and she's going to talk a little bit about, we're going to start to introduce the idea of wellness programs and how having, really a really solid wellness program within your organization can help to support the mental health of all your employees. Brigid, I'm going to turn it to you now.
Thank you, Carolyn. So when you're thinking about mental health for your organization, you might be wondering how you fit in and how you can provide some of those resources that Carolyn just mentioned. And how can you do that while acknowledging employee autonomy and privacy? Because obviously that's very important. So in my role as a health consultant, I lean on the models and theories of health promotion. And one of those models is the ecological model, which is on the screen. The ecological model is a great illustration of how all of the different layers in our lives create an infrastructure that can lead us toward or away from optimal wellness. And from our personal beliefs at the very center, all the way out to things like national policy, everything works together to create that environment of wellness that affects us in every way. So as you can see from the model, your company fits in at the organizational level, but the connections your employees make at work with each other, the influences that affect their individual health attitudes, and your company's relationship with the community at large can add to the success of your wellness program and to your employees' well-being. As a company, the culture and policies that you create and implement have a huge impact on your employees' mental health and physical health. A well-constructed wellness program will meet participants where they are and can help get them to where they want to be. We can go to the next slide. So part of providing wellness programs is making sure that all of the activities and resources are relevant to your employees and available to all. So that's regardless of their age, their gender identity, or their ability. And there are a few ways that we can go about assessing what your employees need, including confidential surveys, worksite assessments, and aggregate reporting from year to year if that's available. One of the most important aspects as well is making sure that your program is well communicated. And that's not only through plain language and accessibility, but also through action. So demonstrate the use of your wellness programs through leadership. Communicate your resources and provide time for the utilization. If employees don't have the time to utilize the program, then it's not doing anyone any good. So clear communication means utilizing multiple forms of messaging. So at Benefit Corporate Wellness, we provide communication plans to ensure messaging reaches as many eligible participants as possible. So we use email, home mailers, our wellness portal to communicate events, challenges, community resources like EAP. And we can even opt into a text feature if participants, are at that level of tech savvy. So, depending on your employee population, home mailers might be better, or things like text messaging might be better. So that's one way that a needs and interest survey can kind of gauge, how best to reach people. So remember that a one-size-fits-all program isn't always right, and you need to learn what your organization needs and implement plans based on those needs. And you want to work with a vendor that is, cognizant of that. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So just like a well-marked trail makes it a lot easier to get to the top of a mountain, well, comparatively, and a bridge makes it possible to cross a river, a clearly communicated and easily accessible wellness infrastructure makes greater health and wellness possible. The easier it is to identify and choose options that increase our mental and physical health, the more likely we are to make those healthy choices. And we all know that our mental health affects all other aspects of our health. If we aren't feeling strong and supported mentally, things like preventive visits and physical activity are probably going to fall to the wayside. Then the barriers compound and our health suffers. And you'll feel that in the workplace. So add to that common barriers that people face in accessing mental health services, some of which are listed on the slide, and the path to health becomes even more challenging. So this is where making the healthy choice, the easy choice, becomes even more crucial, and we need to work on building those healthy habits. And we can move on to the next slide.
So I think I'm taking over from here. Brigid, as I'm listening to you, one of the things that keeps coming up for me is, we at Lehigh Valley Health Network are so incredibly blessed that we have such a robust wellness program and a robust EAP program, because, when we talk about mental health, I see the wellness programs as the foundation, right? It's the way in for many people. It's their first touch point and first opportunity to even, just reflect on their wellness, reflect on their well-being, and to do it in a fun, kind of safe environment, and with fun challenges and, ways to just sort of build some energy around wellness and mental health. But certainly, one of the things that we observed during COVID is, so many of the programs that we offer have require employees to participate outside of the workplace, right? And that's great, and it's important to encourage that. You know, we need to be involved in other activities other than work. But what we were finding is that within the workplace, people were so exhausted. And that was kind of like the common theme that we were hearing across the board, and not just in healthcare, across all the industries that we work with at Preferred EAP. You know, we found that employees more and more were just saying, I'm just so exhausted, right? The stress was so overwhelming. You know, pre-COVID, they had workplace stressors, and then we added all the changes that we had to endure during COVID. Everything was disrupted. The amount of loss that employees were experiencing, it just compounded all those stressors. And so I know at EAP, we really had to shift our focus to internal environment. We had to support our employers with developing workplace cultures that really supported mental health. And it's not easy to do because obviously we still need to get the job done. But, you know, typically when we connect with an employer, where do we begin? We always try to begin with leadership, with the managers. We recognize that the leaders of the organization, the supervisors, the managers, they know their employees better than anybody. You know, for many people, they spend more time with those employees than those employees spend with their own families, right? So our leaders, it's really important that they feel comfortable talking about mental health, talking about their own mental health, acknowledging their own challenges, but also being able to communicate to employees what resources are available and what they can do to take care of themselves within the workplace. So always the first step in implementing, you know, a workplace culture that supports mental health is connecting with managers and supervisors. You can move to the next slide. And then, you know, as we move to some of the other barriers, you know, obviously stigma is a concern, and it's certainly better. I've been a mental health professional for 25 plus years, and it's much better today than it was when I began in my career, but we still have these preconceived notions about mental health. And if you think that you don't have any of these preconceived notions, let me ask you a question. Let's just look at the first bullet point. Mental illness is not a real illness, right? This is, you may not think that, or you may say, no, of course that's not true. But just imagine an employee calling in sick and saying, I'm struggling with my mental health today, and I'm going to take a mental health day. How do you feel about that? You know, what is your reaction to that? Or I'm feeling excess stress in my job, and so I'm taking a day off. Versus I'm calling in sick because I have the flu, right? I mean, we need to really be honest with ourselves about our perception of mental health, because again, that's where it begins. That's where the culture begins, is within each one of us. How do we perceive mental health? You know, one of the things that we do at EAP is we do threat assessments. You know, if there is an employee who is making statements that are concerning to the employer, we will, they can come and sit with us, and we will evaluate their threat assessment. And we have a whole procedure that we go through. But what we find in communicating with employers is that very often individuals who are presenting with just mental health concerns, there's this immediate fear, like, could they be violent? Could they be violent toward themselves? Could they be violent toward others, right? There is this preconceived notion that mental health is strongly correlated with violence, and that really is not true. There are certain conditions that are more prone to violence, but in general, that is not true. And the other one that we all struggle with, you know, all of us, even me as a mental health clinician, I work with mental health clinicians, right? I still struggle with this. You know, mental illness is a sign of weakness, right? We still all want to present as though we are on top of the world, that we are capable of doing anything. And this certainly is a problem within the healthcare industry, right? That there's this belief that if you talk about mental health issues or you present with mental health concerns, that somehow you will be viewed as weak. And again, how do we begin to impact the culture? Where does it start? It starts within each one of us, right? Checking in with ourselves about what do we really think and feel about mental health? You know, if someone is talking about mental health, what kind of reaction do we have? That self-awareness is really critical. You can move to the next slide. And so, you know, obviously the goal here is for all of us to stand up to stigma, right? And again, this is where the training for leaders is so critical, because we want to help them feel comfortable addressing stigma in the workplace. If they hear people disparaging fellow employees because they can't hack it, or they're always stressed out, or they're mentally weak, you know, because they needed a day off, we want to address that stigma. We need to stand up to it, and we need to change the way we talk about mental health. And again, most people probably view themselves as supportive of individuals who are struggling with mental health, or just supportive of mental health in general. But let's move to the next slide and let's kind of check our language. You know, have you heard someone say some of these phrases, right? This has become common, so common, it sometimes surprises me. You know, the number of times I hear from people who say, I'm so OCD, and they really have no understanding of what obsessive compulsive disorder actually is, right? And how difficult it is for individuals who really struggle with that mental illness, right? You know, just wanting your death to be organized does not make you OCD, right? And so we have to be aware of the language we use that in some way minimizes the mental health conditions that some of our coworkers might be experiencing. You know, if someone is struggling with focus, it's my ADD. You know, my ex is such a psycho. The weather is so bipolar today. You know, and the number of times I've had employees referred to us for them saying, God, I'm so stressed out, I just want to kill myself, or this job is just making me want to, right? I mean, these are things that we say so automatically. It's become part of our common jargon as human beings. And so we really need to check ourselves, be aware of the language we use. I was doing a seminar the other day and I shared this slide, and I found myself later on saying something that I was like, why did I say that? You know, even me, I still have to check in with myself and say, we all have to be aware of the language we're using. The one that really gets to me, that I really have a strong reaction to, is he or she is a frequent flyer, right? And this is often referred to individuals who present in the emergency department who maybe have a substance abuse disorder, and they're presenting because they are going through withdrawal and they're desperate, right? Because they can't get into treatment, they don't have access to treatment, and so they're desperate to alleviate their symptoms. And being referred to as a frequent flyer completely disregards the challenges that they are facing. So collectively as a community, this is so important for us to check ourselves, right? And again, this is how we stand up to stigma. We need to check and say, you know, are you really OCD? Or maybe you just like to be organized, right? You can move to the next slide. And so I can't, you know, talk about mental health without saying this, because this is just such a powerful way to cut through this stigma. We work with so many organizations, and the utilization of their EAP benefit varies dramatically. And one of the strongest correlators that I have found with utilization of EAP services is leaders who share their own experiences. Are leaders who say, I went to EAP, I experienced this stress, I struggled with my own mental health, and this is how I addressed it, right? And this is not necessarily, you know, some people might have a reaction to that and think, oh, but my mental health is private, it's confidential, and absolutely that's true. It's not about violating confidentiality, but it's about normalizing our experiences with mental health. You know, if we go to a primary care doctor for a well visit, or we go to the dentist for a checkup, we have no qualms about sharing that with individuals. But if we go to a counselor to address our mental health, we somehow view that differently. We treat our mental health so differently than we treat our physical health. And so this, you know, again, it's one way that we as leaders can kind of cut through that stigma and really encourage, you know, people to share their own experiences, share your own experiences. You can move on. So another strategy that is really important, and I'm going to have Brigid talk a little bit about how our wellness programs can help with this, right? We need to be checking in regularly with our employees. So often, you know, we have this, I hear from managers and supervisors all the time that, hey, I have an open door policy. You know, my employees always know they can come and talk to me anytime. My door is always open, right? And that's great. It's really important to have that kind of policy in place that helps to set the tone. It's creating a supportive, nurturing culture. However, we have to remind ourselves of the stigma, of the fear that is so often associated with mental health concerns, right? And so we have to do so much more outreach, and we have to engage our employees. We need to be curious. We need to be asking them how they're doing, not just waiting for them to reach out to us. And I know, Brigid, you talked a little bit about the surveying that you do within the wellness programs, and I know we have a wellness portal where employees are able to fill out a survey that gives us some indication of their well-being. I'll let you speak to all of those things.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, so we do have a health risk assessment as part of our portal, and we can keep an eye on that to track like what's trending in your organization. So one thing that we can do is look at it weekly to see if there's any at-risk individuals for suicidal ideation. And then if we do see that, we can confidentially refer them to EAP. We can also keep track of reporting year to year to see, you know, if you've made some changes within your organization, whether they're working to create lasting wellness changes or not. So the health risk assessment is definitely a great tool in keeping track of the overall mental and physical wellness trends in your company. And then to touch on something else that Carolyn mentioned, obviously the open door policy, having that culture of communication is a great starting point. But depending on someone's background and their history, they might not feel comfortable, you know, going to leadership with their mental or physical needs. So one way that we can address that kind of a situation is to offer a confidential needs and interests survey. And we can tailor that based on, you know, your employee population. But the nice thing about that is we act as the intermediary to confidentially relay the concerns of your employees, and then we can build a wellness program based on their feedback. And a lot of the aspects of our reporting can offer kind of real-time program development and adjustments. So a recent example, not mental health related, but having to do with the pandemic and a lot of the changes that we saw based on that. So one of our coaches noticed a large uptick in complaints about back health, and we realized that our back health action plans, which are 8-week self-guided plans, were being utilized, and that had to do with people being at home. So they're sitting more, they're not getting out and about. So our coach created a webinar based on that. So with information, what you can do to find resources, protect your physical back health. And that's been a huge success across a lot of our groups that we work with. So that's just kind of a real-time example of how we keep track of some of the trends and adjust programming based on what we're seeing.
Thanks, Brigid.
Thank you.
Move
We
to
can
the
go to the next slide.
So, I like to include this slide because so often, people ask me, well, how do I know if my employee is struggling in some way? How do I know if you're not, getting the responses or the information you need from surveys? What else should you be looking for? Well, these are some telltale signs, right? And unfortunately, so often organizations will approach these symptoms, these warning signs, fairly quickly with disciplinary measures, right? Before we really have a good understanding of what's driving some of this behavior. Absenteeism, of course, it's a huge problem with productivity in the workplace. But do you really understand what is driving that absenteeism? Is it just a challenge with childcare? Is it a challenge with mental health? Is it a physical ailment? We don't really know, right? And so, again, creating a workplace culture where we're able to gain that information from our employees, whether it's confidentially or directly, to help us understand, what is contributing to some of these productivity concerns, why, so and so used to act this way and now they're acting this way, right? What is impacting that behavior? We have to start getting curious, and we have to consider mental health as a factor, and not just approach it strictly from a disciplinary perspective. You can move to the next slide. And so I want to talk about a concept, because we're talking a lot about workplace culture. And I want to talk about some research that has been done on workplace culture. A professor from the Wharton School of Management, Sigal Varsaid, and she has a colleague, Mandy O'Neill. They've done research on something called companionate love. And, typically when I talk to employers and we use the word love, they're like, no, we don't use that word in the workplace, right? Because we automatically think of romantic love. And that's not what we're talking about here. Companionate love is a workplace culture that, basically when I show up to work, I know my coworkers care about me. I know my boss cares about me. They see me as a whole person. They're not just concerned about what I can do for them in the workplace. They recognize me as a whole human being who has a life outside of work. And when they say, how are you doing? They really mean it, and they'll actually wait for you to respond, right? And you know who I'm talking about, those individuals who ask you how you're doing and they don't really want to know, right? A culture of companionate love includes, just care and concern for your employee's well-being. And it's evidenced by several things, right? I mean, there's, if you think of workplace culture as an iceberg, right? And we typically use that metaphor to describe culture. What do we think is occurring at the lowest level, beneath the surface, right? Those are all those basic assumptions that we operate within the workplace, and this is where, again, leaders set the tone. If leaders are uncomfortable talking about mental health, everything else follows from there. If emotions are not accepted in the workplace, then everything flows from there, right? So if you want to evaluate your workplace culture, you've got to start at the level of basic assumptions. What are some of those underlying messages that are being communicated? And then going to the next level, what are the written messages? Let's just take policy and procedure, for example. When it comes to sick days, do you have a policy that allows for mental health days? Is that woven into your workplace? That would be an example of expressed written, values and assumptions about mental health, right? And then you go to the highest level, and this is where it's very easy for all of us, and I'm going to have Brigid talk a little bit about how wellness programs help to foster this. If we look at the top, at the surface, what are the artifacts? If you look around your workplace, what do you see that actually represents employees caring for one another? Now, of course, COVID has changed a lot of that for us because we're not gathering anymore like we used to, but in the past, workplaces that had companionate love, they would celebrate birthdays, right? They would get together. They would know about one another's families. They would know if so-and-so is having a birthday. Is your grandson, graduating from college? We would know things about one another, and there would be evidence that would be indicating that, like celebrations. Gratitude boards. I know that I'm walking into a supportive workplace when they have a board that has pictures of one another's dogs or something that matters to them, or a quote that I particularly love, right? Ways that we are sort of conveying that we care about each of us as individuals, not just what we can do in the workplace. I'll move to the next slide and turn it over to you, Brigid, to talk a little bit about how the wellness programs support that culture.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, one of the things that we offer is a worksite environment and culture assessment. And that's something that you can kind of, take a quick look around yourself to assess where you stand with that kind of culture. So do you have green space available for your employees to walk? Do you have a quiet meditation room or a lactation room for breastfeeding mothers to pump in privacy? What things are you offering clearly, accessibly, that support mental health and make your employees feel that you're thinking about them and that you've taken their mental and physical well-being into consideration? So you can tie your wellness program into your environment as well. So like I mentioned, having walking paths, we offer wellness challenges, and they can be group or individual challenges, but we found that the group challenges are really popular right now as people are trying to rebuild some of the relationships that they might have lost during the COVID pandemic and isolation periods. So these group challenges are really fun because you're all working towards a communal goal, or maybe there's some friendly competition between some coworkers. But it encourages you to get outside, to utilize your wellness program, and to talk about your wellness program and make it a priority. So that's that supportive environment, and thinking about how that supportive environment can tie in with your policies and create that companionate love culture that Carolyn mentioned. Okay, and we can move on to the next slide. And you can demonstrate your buy-in to this culture, as Carolyn mentioned before, with leadership. It's so important for you to utilize the programs, utilize like the challenges, the space. A meditation room is great, but only if it's being used. If people are being penalized for taking their break and having some quiet time, then it's not so useful. So take part in health fairs, join team physical challenges, prioritize work-life balance, and incentivize your employees to do the same. Create a climate of wellness and acceptance and not of judgment. Celebrate the use of your wellness resources. And know your program and make sure that it's clearly communicated at multiple levels, like we talked about before. So honesty and communication about what you have available is really important. And if an employee asks about something that you don't have, then have on hand a recommendation that they can access in the community. So a quick statistic about that is more than 9 in 10 workers say they feel more motivated at work if they feel their leaders support their well-being. So it's really important to demonstrate your buy-in into that well-being. Okay, and Carolyn's going to talk about how we can create healthy habits at work.
Yes, so as we indicated, a workplace culture is the foundation, but how do we integrate good habits on a daily basis, right? Ultimately we become what we repeat, right? That's what habits are about. The more we repeat a certain behavior, the more we become that that behavior. If I run every day, over time, I become a runner, right? So we need to be thinking in the same terms when it comes to mental health, and thinking about, the culture is a way to sort of create the framework that we can work within. And so, when we think about mental health habits at work, what do we do every day? This is something that we should be evaluating. Leaders should be evaluating what routines do we engage in on a daily basis. Do we have artifacts around our unit? Are there things in our workplace that represent mental health, that represent caring for one another? And one of the quickest and easiest ways to create a mental health habit is think about a routine that occurs every day, and then pair it with some type of mental health message or a mindful moment, right? So often, organizations will have maybe meetings first thing in the morning where they gather to sort of set the intention for the day, review work tasks. Maybe it's something that happens on a daily basis. That's a great example of a routine that we can now integrate a very brief mental health message, right? So, when we're dealing with the healthcare network, they have shift change, right? They have a 10, 15-minute shift change. They have a lot to accomplish in that time. But would it really be that challenging to add 30 seconds of let's just slow down and, appreciate ourselves in this moment. Let's think about our mental health and our well-being, and what do we need, to do to take care of ourselves today? What can we do to take care of one another? It's something very simple, that we can integrate into our workplace. And certainly using external triggers to help insert a pause. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But think about COVID and all the behavior changes we had to make. Social distancing, wearing masks, right? Well, thankfully, workplaces helped us with that by giving us signage, right? They had dots on the floor to help us understand how what 6 feet actually looks like, and to remind us to put on our masks. These external triggers help us to develop those new behaviors. And so look around your workplace. What kind of signage do you have? Does it only speak to workplace tasks, to producing, or does it speak to reflecting and pausing, right? That's what we need to increase in order to improve our mental health. You can move to the next slide. So, and certainly health coaching is another way for us to start to integrate those habits. I'll turn it to you, Brigid.
Absolutely. Health coaching is a great way to learn some new techniques for integrating healthy habits into our everyday lives. Health and wellness coaching is one of the most diverse offerings we have for someone who doesn't know where to begin with their health and wellness journey, or who may need help goal setting. It can provide a clear path to other resources as well, which is always useful. A certified wellness coach will use motivational interviewing to draw out an employee's intrinsic motivators, and we all know that those are the most important and long lasting, and will work with them to create an achievable action plan. So the coach is there as a partner, and because they're not leading in that sort of expert role that we're so used to with most of the medical world, they help build trust and confidence. So for someone who might not feel comfortable reaching out to a counselor, or who might have had bad experiences with doctors in the past, a health coach is a great way to start rebuilding some of that trust in the system and into the world of wellness. And they can help an employee create action steps based around anything that they're interested in working on. So for someone who maybe hasn't been to their primary care provider in years, that might be a concern for them. So they can talk to their coach about maybe finding a new doctor and setting goals based around that. They might have goals based around time management, which has been really huge lately. And of course, there are always, physical diet goals that people might have. But a coach will never prescribe. They're not working in a medical capacity. They're not offering a prescriptive path at all. A coach is really there to help a client figure out where they want to go and what wellness looks like to them. And they'll help them build that self-efficacy to find the resources themselves and build those healthy habits into their everyday lives. So health coaching is a really great tool for reintegrating healthy habits into life. Okay. Next slide. So how can a thoughtfully built wellness program help? Just to kind of think about all the different ways that a wellness program affects retention, affects employee morale. I'm just going to read off some statistics. So about 77% of employees think that workplace wellness programs positively impacted their company culture. That's huge. About 70% of employees enrolled in wellness programs have reported higher job satisfaction than those not enrolled. Employee morale is cited as the most improved metric following implementation of a wellness program, and 61% of employees enrolled in their company's wellness program have reported healthier lifestyle changes. So I think all of those kind of show how useful a wellness program is at demonstrating your buy-in into your employees' holistic wellness. Okay, we can move on to the next slide.
And so we want to end with just referencing some of our mindful meditation programs, because certainly during COVID, this has probably been our #1 request, from employers. How can I help my employees be more mindful? How can I give them some type of immediate stress relief? And so I wanted to make sure to highlight some of the programs that we at Preferred EAP, we have been so blessed to be able to partner with LVHN Center for Mindfulness in providing some of these mindful meditation programs. And I have to also go back to the health coaching and again, just sort of talk about how critical that is in guiding employees toward these resources. I know certainly the health coaches have made multiple referrals to EAP, but also refer to the mindful programs, right? Helping employees really identify what are the resources that are out there and how can they integrate this into their life, right? That is just such a valuable resource for an employee, just to be able to talk that through and to figure out, how do I integrate this into my life? And so I want to make sure to highlight that. So these are, the mindful programs that we offer right now. If you are interested, you can get more information on our website at preferredeap.org. But we have 3 basic offerings: mindfulness on the spot. It's kind of like our introductory session, 45 minutes. It just gives, and we do this free for employers. And we actually have a session coming up May 25th in the spirit of Mental Health Month. And so if you don't have the information about it, you can, again, find out on our website. And this is a great way just to introduce the concept of mindfulness. And then if you wanted to go further, we have Growing Resiliency Through Mindfulness. It's a virtual program that takes the whole concept of mindful meditation and goes deeper with the experience. It's 6 weeks, 90 minutes each session. And then, of course, the gold standard of mindfulness is the mindfulness-based stress reduction. This was a program that we traditionally have provided only in person, and we are hopeful that we can get back to that soon. Our goal was to provide MBSR again for the community this year in person. We're still hopeful, but certainly that's kind of like the gold standard of mindful meditation programs. It's the most intensive, includes a retreat. We're hopeful at a minimum, if we're not able to do this in person, we will be able to provide this virtually. You can move to the next slide. And I want to introduce a colleague, Carol. If you want to turn your camera on. I brought one of our teachers, Carol Sorrentino, along so that we could end our time together with a brief mindful meditation, just to help us begin to think about very simple ways that we can integrate mindfulness into our workplace. And Carol's going to lead us in an exercise. This particular slide is something that I share with a lot of companies. Again, sort of thinking about external cues, ways that we can put things around us just to help remind us to insert those pauses. So Carol, with that, I'm going to let you lead us. It's 10:51, so we have a few minutes, and then we'll take it from there. Thanks,
So
Carol.
good morning, everyone. So really excited to offer you the opportunity to take part in a brief practice. I'm going to call this Instant Pause and Reset. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable with that. Otherwise, you don't have to. You can just kind of soften your gaze. So this can be done anywhere, anytime. Waiting for an elevator, probably not closing your eyes then, but sitting at your desk, lying in bed, when you feel like you need kind of a reset, something to help us to get back with our attention. So the first thing we're going to do is ground ourselves. So noticing that we have our feet on the floor and that we can feel the chair supporting our body. And if you're standing, you would, just notice the length of your legs and where you have your arms. And now we're just going to scan our body briefly by noticing if we are holding tension anywhere. So maybe you're noticing that you're clenching your teeth, or your shoulders are up towards your ears and you would like lower them at this time. You're checking in with the rest of your body. What are your hands doing? Are your hands open and soft? Moving down to the rest of your body, where are you feeling tension? Maybe it's your back. So there are times when we can't change the tension in our body, but we can recognize it and accept it. And the acceptance goes a long way for us to move forward. So now I'm going to invite you to, we're going to follow our breaths. This is going to be just a short, we're going to follow 3 breaths. So you can notice your breath at your nostrils, at your chest, or in your belly. So if you're using the chest or the belly, you might want to put your hand over that part. So with the very next breath, we're going to notice, so this is just natural breathing. You don't have to take deep breaths. So noticing the next breath, noticing the inhale and the exhale. And then the next breath, breathing in and breathing out. And the next breath, focusing on the in breath and the out breath. So perhaps you are noticing that your mind is wandering a little bit. That's another good thing to check in when you do your reset. Am I worrying? Am I planning? Am I reminiscing? So when we notice what we're doing, we can label it. Oh, I'm thinking right now. I'm worrying right now. And then checking in with the body, labeling that, and saying to ourselves, let it be, let it go. Focusing on being present right in this moment. And now welcoming yourself back to where we are in our presentation. And maybe saying to yourself, treating myself with kindness right now in this moment. Thanking yourself for being here at this presentation. So I am now going to turn it back over to my colleagues.
Carol, thank you so much for that. What always surprises me is how simple it can be to hit that reset button, and how it doesn't have to be very complicated, you know, and just taking that moment to pause. And it's amazing how impactful that is. Carol, did you want to say anything more about just your experience with mindfulness? I know you've been a teacher for 15 years, 15 plus years. Yeah. And is there something you want to just kind of make sure we all understand about mindfulness?
Yes, thank you for that. Well, 15 years ago, I really didn't have a lot of knowledge about what mindfulness is and meditation. I thought that I couldn't sit long enough to quiet my mind, but one of my biggest benefits to teaching and practicing mindfulness meditation is that I found a way to calm myself in times of anxiety and nervousness. And I've also found a way to increase my focus and attention. So who doesn't need that? You know, when we're busy, we need to focus and hone in on what we're doing. And 3 breaths can do that. It can take 30 seconds and we can focus in on what's going on. And another wonderful concept is self-compassion. Adding that part to your day, waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to be kind to myself. I'm going to practice a pause amidst my day. So those are some of the things that I've learned about mindfulness. And anybody can meditate. Anybody can do it. As long as you can breathe, you can do mindfulness.
And I'm glad that you said that, because I think often people do feel intimidated about the idea of meditating, which is why I thought it was important to just give a brief exercise to help all of us recognize the value of just inserting those pauses and focusing on our breath. And lo and behold, you're, you know, meditating. It's not that difficult. So thank you so much, Carol. And so I think it's time for us to turn to questions. You can move to the next slide, which is really just a resource that I like to draw people's attention to, the Center for Workplace Mental Health. This is a great, if you as an employer want to find case studies for other organizations that are integrating wellness programs and mental health awareness into their workplace culture, this is a great place to go. But Cary, do you have questions for us?
I do. Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and take some questions. We're running a little late on time, but one question came over with so many employees working remotely, what is the best way to promote companion love in employees?
So I get that question a lot. It's a great question. So, you know, so even though folks are working virtually, so what happens is when we join in our virtual meetings, whatever platform you're using, if you're joining your Zoom meeting, we sort of launch right into our agenda, right? We figure we're more concerned about people's time. And so we quickly launch into the tasks. What I would suggest is that always make sure you do what you would do in a meeting in person, is check in with everybody first. You know, have those water cooler moments via Zoom, right? Let's not, you know, a lot of those organic connections are missing now in the virtual world. So now we have to be just much more intentional about inserting them. Create maybe, you know, 10-minute meetings where it's just about us getting together and talking about how are you doing? How was your day? You know, any highlights, anything you want to share, right? We've got to create that sense of community. But it just has to be so much more intentional.
Okay, thank you. Are EAP programs available to families of employees? And the answer there is yes. That is based on how you enroll in the plan as a company. I think we are out of time, so that completes our presentation. I wanted to to again thank all of you for joining us. If you'd like more info on how to customize your wellness or EAP programs specifically to fit your company culture, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. My information, as well as a copy of today's presentation, will be sent to your email. Have a great rest of your day. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.